You mentioned the role of emotion, and you're so right. We tend to look at our lives as these hierarchical constructs. You go to school, you get the job, the house, the car, da 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 da. And actually, our lives are an emotional construct.
Yes.
And we don't really look or reflect it upon that until something really traumatic happens and maybe we're forced to.
Yes. It's so easy to go through life and be numb. But that's you're dead. You might as well be dead. You know.
Sally Raymond has written a brilliant book. The book, The Son I Knew Too Late. It took her 28 years to write this book. It's a story of how we've gotten caught up in our linear lives and how we've forgotten to understand and unravel our emotional experiences and what they mean to each of us. For Sally, this meant revisiting her son's life and suicide. What did she miss? What was really going on? Beneath the facade of the perfect child, life really wasn't so perfect. This is a very personal and powerful book that every parent should read. It'll make you reassess how you relate to your children and what a difference true emotional connection can make. Please welcome Sally Raymond to Bump in the Road. Sally, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Well, hello, Pat. It's really great to be here, and it's great to get to know you. I'm just a girl who was kind of a tomboy growing up. In fact, the big tomboy growing up, because there were no girls in my neighborhood, and there were only guys. And my mother had been a tomboy, and I think I was about 5 when she whispered to me, she said, "Go with the guys, they have more fun." And I think she must have talked to them too about it, but the boys allowed me to join their clique. And every day during the summers, we would hike to the beach, which was about one highway and an overgrown mansion, their grounds away from the beach. And we would go through there every single day and swim all by ourselves, no chaperones, no nothing, from the time I was about 8 or 9 until I was about 16 or 17. And it was really, really cool. And that was great. I was quite a nerd. And as well, my mother and father plied me with a lot of books, and I was very introverted otherwise. And so I read and all that. And I got married at 19, which I should not have done, but I, little do you know, at 19. But then I had these 2 baby boys. And all I had was, I was just a high school graduate, C student, never cared about school, even though I could do well if I wanted to. But my little boys, I mean, honestly, these 2 babies came and they were adorable. And the firstborn, though, was just too smart. Too smart. He was reading it too. And that was scary. I was like, oh my gosh, because until then I thought he was crazy.
How so?
Well, because he was doing everything Dr. Spock's book said he shouldn't do. That he was doing that things. He was in instead of the terrible 2s, he had the terrible 1s. He was just horrible. And I brought him to the doctor, and all he said is, "Isn't he cute?" And that didn't help. But when I heard him reading a sign on the freeway, he was spelling it out, sounding it out, and he read Texaco. He went Texaco. And wow. I was like, oh my gosh, he's smart. And that scared the living daylights out of me, because I thought I was stupid. Because I was a C student. I was like, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to handle a boy like this? He's just he's going to be, impossible. And he was, because at about 5 years old, he was giving me 45-minute debates on why he didn't need to make his bed. And he was winning. And
That's
I
a
was
little intimidating. I can see that.
and I was like, holy cow, I mean, I have to stay the mother of this guy. I have to keep my credibility. I have to somehow, at least match him if I can. And so I realized I had to go back to school. And I went back, and I mean, I hadn't been there in many years. And I mean, came back with an A plus and a B plus, and I thought that was so exciting. I was just thrilled with myself. And I walked in and I said, John, you won't believe what I got. And he said, what'd you get? I said, I got an A plus and a B plus. And he looked at me like I'd about died. And he went, you got a B?
That was not within his experience, I take it.
Never had a B. Hadn't realized that till he said that. I ended up on the couch in the fetal position while he was dancing around the coffee table in front of me going, Mom is a B. Mom is a B. And I was like, I will never let you get the chance to do this again if I can help it.
How do you raise a child that is that precocious?
There are no rules. There's no books. I think Alice Miller might have been good, but I never knew her at that time. But he was just beyond all. There were no books, and he also had some horrible things happen. And I think that really energized this. I'm going to be the best boy ever to prove I'm worthy. And I think, and so he was on a rocket ship. And at 14, he was he was at the university in calculus with 250 regular STEM students, college students, and every quarter he got the top grade. He got the top grade in the class, and was inventing new proofs.
This is a story, though, with multiple layers.
Yeah.
Are you okay talking about some of the things that happened to him growing up? Because it really sets the stage for everything else that followed.
Absolutely, I am. I mean, my whole life has been dedicated to finding the truth and exposing it and learning from it and trying to, what are the solutions? And that's what I'm trying to do, is using his life and what happened to him as, in terms of, because he never did anything wrong. He just did too well. He never took drugs. He never did anything illegal. He was just the best kid ever. And yet the worst happened. And so, yes, I'm open to anything.
There were several events in his childhood. Your book, by the way, is absolutely remarkable. I can only imagine how incredibly difficult it had to be to write this and dive into all these elements. And as I said to you before we got on, your book should be a PhD thesis, and it should be required reading for every single parent out there. Because as parents, or as adults, we get so wrapped up in the roteness of our lives, do this, do that, the to-do list. We forget that a lot of our communication is really energetic, particularly
absolutely.
with a child.
Yes. Yes. And that is absolutely true. And you've nailed it. You really have. And it is about the energy. It is about the availability to say yes instead of no. It is about allowing, trusting, believing in, being passionate with your child, and allowing them to flourish on their own terms without your interference, to the best of your ability, as long as they're safe. If they're not safe, rein them in and make it perfectly clear why you're doing it. But
do you think did your son's emotional evolution keep up with his intellectual evolution?
the social emotional skills could not possibly stay in sync with his intellect. And that was a huge problem that I didn't realize was separating him from the ground that he needed to have to maintain himself, because society isn't geared to help kids through these different layers. it doesn't do that. We have a standard that is only applies to normal kids. But I don't believe any kid is really normal. But I think
No.
we end up forcing them into a smaller version of themselves as we go, and we get smaller and smaller and smaller as we rise.
I totally agree. I often say that we spend the first half of our lives having all this crap heaped upon us. And if we're lucky, we get to spend the second half of our lives tearing it back.
Yes, I believe. I mean, to me, every baby born comes as our teacher.
How was
And
your son your teacher?
oh, good gosh, the first when I first of all, I had a natural childbirth. I was the first natural childbirth in Santa Barbara, which you don't want to be. They are not ready for you. They don't want you, because they have no way to handle you. They don't know what to do with you. You're a disaster, and you're causing chaos in the hospital. But I ended up having a natural against their will, kind of. And I remember as he was being lifted out of me, this strangest thing happened. And I've never had this happen before, and I've never had it since. But it was like a voice came through that said something I would never say. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't me. I don't know who it was, but it was not me. I would never have said this. As I saw him for the first time, he was shimmering and with all the wetness and everything, and he just looked so incredibly perfect. And the voice said, "Here is the one who will teach you all you need to know."
Wow.
And I was like, "What do you mean?" I mean, I was like, "No, parents teach their children. Children don't teach their parents." But it was the weirdest thing. And I just was something that just came through like that. And it was so anonymous. I didn't know how to put it into anything, but it struck me deeply, and I never forgot it. And
Now, no,
from
I'm sorry.
huh?
No, go ahead.
And from the very beginning, I mean, even at 2, or 5, when he was giving me all those debates, he was like, Jesus in the temple telling the bishops and everybody else what to do and how to do it. He was really kind of forcing me to become more than I could be. And so as he grew, I had to be his mom. I had to continue. And so I didn't get another B after that. And I ended up graduating with highest honors, which was only not because I was so smart, but because I couldn't bear another negative evaluation from him. That was the reason. But what he did is he forced me to become someone I would never have become any other way. I would never have gone back to school. I would never have, gotten straight A's. I would never be who I am now. But he kind of forced me to do something that would have been otherwise impossible for me, because I was a C student and I couldn't possibly have imagined being, highest honors. But then he's continued to teach me through both his life and his suicide, because his suicide demolished everything I knew. It was like the magic etch-a-sketch just erased. And I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know anything. And I was so incredibly demolished that for a long time I was very suicidal. But I really knew that I could not, leave I couldn't leave his brother, who had already gone through a horrible trauma too with his brother's suicide. I couldn't do that to his brother. So I had to stay. But then I was just becoming licensed. This happened just as I was becoming licensed as a psychotherapist. And just now I had the tools and the insights I'd never had as a mom to possibly find out what I missed. And that was an odyssey that took me years to uncover and write up. And every time I'd write a story up, I would have to throw it in a file cabinet and just run away and cry and cry and cry. And sometimes it would take me months to come back and start again and look for the next thing. But as I did, I found the stories mothers don't know and kids can't tell them, but they're real and they're happening. And so he had some very hard things happen when he was 3. He had, we had just moved to a new home, and it was a very, very, very safe looking little middle class neighborhood, and we were real excited about it. And I was busy painting his room one day when he came and asked me, he said, "Can I go meet new friends?" And we'd only been in about a week or so. And I said, "Yeah, you do need to meet new friends." But it was a cul-de-sac, and I could see from his bedroom the 3 houses on either side of us. And I said, "Yes, you can go," because I'd already met the neighbors around the cul-de-sac, and they were all very fine. I said, "Yeah," I said, "you can go for 3 houses away. That was it. You can only go there, and then look for friends." And so he left, and he was such a good boy. I had no question that was what he was going to do, and I could see him from the window, so I was watching him as well when I was looking up from the painting. And all of a sudden I looked up and he was gone. And I was like, "Where'd he go? Somebody let him in? Which houses was he? What happened?" And I was like, "What do I do? What do I do?" And I was waiting, and after about, I don't know how long it was, probably about not more than maybe 10 or 15 minutes, I saw him coming around the corner, which was too far. He'd gone another house away, at least. And he was coming back. And when he came upstairs to me, he just came into the doorway, and his face was pure white. And it wasn't the face of my son. It wasn't him at all. And he was holding some very strange little red plastic things. And I said, "Where did you get that?" And he said, "I met a new friend." And just the way he said it, I was like, he's in shock. He's something's horribly wrong. And anyway, I said, "Well, what's his name?" And he said, "I promise not to tell." And I was like, "Okay," that just was like, okay. And I said, "Well, you're going to take me down to show me the house. You don't have to tell me his name, but you have to show me where you were." And he would say, "I don't want to." And I said, "You have to. We have to do this." I said, "I know something's really wrong, and I know it's about that. And so you have to show me." And so we walked around the corner, and there was a young man laying on the grass on the house, right on the 4th house, right around the corner. And he looked at me and he looked at John, and the hatred and the anger in his eyes was unbelievable. And I wanted to kill him. And I didn't know why. And my son I was holding his hands, and he was trying to drag me back. He was trying to run away. And I was just looking at that guy going, "Come on, just come near me. I will scratch your eyes out. You will not be alive." Because something had happened, and I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was him. And I'd never felt anything like this in my life. And I just turned very quietly, and I just walked John back, and I said, "John, that was really a good job. Really, really good. I know that was so hard, and a really good job, really." And I, talked to him all the way back to the house. And I said, you're safe. Nothing's going to happen. And I put him upstairs in my bed, and I gave him some orange juice. He didn't want to talk. And I went downstairs and called 911. And it turned out this boy had molested my son. And I don't want to talk about it because it's still too hard for me to even say anything. But
there's another story in your book that really touched me too. The whole book is amazing. But when John was born, he had broken his clavicle.
Oh.
Will you talk about that? Because that's something that I bet parents can relate to everywhere. And it had a really profound impact on his psychosocial development.
Absolutely. Thank you for reminding me of that. was getting ahead of myself. But yeah, at his birth, I was just, this is my first baby. I didn't know anything about babies. And I'd gotten a pediatrician who was much older, really old, but I thought he was probably really super experienced. And so anyway, I got my baby and I took him home, and he was crying and crying and crying. And I'd call the doctor and he'd just say, oh, it's colic, something that all kids go through. It lasts about 3 months, and you're just like, yeah, it'll be over in 3 months, no problem. And he'd give me stuff for it that only constipated my son and made it worse. And I was just beside myself trying to deal with this poor little baby and trying to be the good mom I was supposed to be, and pick him up and hold him, and he'd cry. I'd lay him down and he'd cry. And the only thing that ever worked is one time I called the doctor's office and he wasn't there, but his colleague was. And when he got on the phone, he said, oh, colic? He said, okay, tell you what you do. He said, go to your kitchen cabinet, pull out a 12-ounce glass, fill it with wine, take a teaspoon out of the cabinet, dip it in the wine, feed that to the kid, and you drink the rest. And I tell you, it worked.
But it didn't get to the root cause. What was really going on here?
But at 3 months of pain and anguish and calls to the doctor, and all they do is just give me that whitewash over and over again. And I believed him. I didn't know any better. And at 3 months, though, he was still in agony. And I was like, it's been 3 months and you said it would be over. And he said, well, and maybe it's the 4-month colic or the 5-month. And I just hung up on him. I just was so mad. And I called around and somebody gave me the name of a pediatrician. I called him. He said, bring him right in. And I brought him in. This was Dr. Kinsell. He was a character, but I brought him in and he took John's clothes off and he started checking him over. And all of a sudden he was right around he was checking the shoulders, and he said, oh, look. And he said, feel right here. And he felt right at the shoulder blade, right in the middle. And you could feel a bump there. Mm-hmm. And he said, he's got a broken collarbone. He said, that's the first bone that breaks in the body during birth. Because it's if the opening is too small, that's how it happened. That's the weakest bone, so it allows birth to happen at all.
So what was the outcome of this with your son?
Well, I was devastated to hear this. It could have just I felt like I was on the ceiling, just in shock, because for 3 months, my son had experienced me as the one picking him up, hurting him, and his body hurting him when he was on his own moving. And there was nobody helping him. And he was alone. He was helpless. And the only reality he had is that people hurt you. Mm-hmm. And so when after that, I mean, the doctor showed me how to handle him so that wouldn't happen. He said, it's already starting to heal, which is good. But he said, you just stay away from that part and let that part just be so that it can continue to heal. And I did. And so he got better. But whenever you would come close to him, you would see him flinch. He would back away. And it'd be like almost a little startle reflex. And that became permanent. And so you couldn't really touch him. He would shy away. And when he was about, I don't know, I think he was about 9 or 10, I finally felt he was old enough to understand. So I told him what happened. And I said, this isn't natural for you. This isn't natural. It isn't normal. And it's just something that happened at birth that was not my fault. It wasn't my fault, but it was a terrible, terrible thing. And we went through hell together for those first 3 months. And I didn't know any better. And yet at the same time, I should have gone in a second opinion a lot sooner, but I didn't. And I believed the doctor. And this is what happened. And he just said, well, I'm glad to know where I got it, but what do I do about it? And I was like, I don't know, John. But I said, but the first part the most important part to me is that this isn't who you are. This is just something that happened to you at the very early age. It isn't who you are. You can overcome this, but I don't know how. I mean, I don't know how. I don't know. I wasn't a therapist then. I was just trying to be a mom. But anyway, that really had a tremendous effect on him. And also the molestation capitalized on that, where he would just stay removed, and he fled into his head.
Yeah.
He fled into his head. And so he wasn't a physical boy. He wasn't athletic, although he could do that sort of thing. That wasn't natural for him. That isn't anything that he would you'd see John do. He would be behind a book. He would be, reading and going to school. He loved school, and he flew. And the teachers all loved him and everything like that, but he never developed a physicality.
As a younger person, he tried to. You found out years later from a babysitter that he had tried to hang himself.
Yeah, he did. I was his father was unfortunately unable to have any emotional availability to my son, and when he was molested, the first thing that my husband said when he found out is he just said, "Oh, John, okay, you're gonna be a homosexual, right?" And at that time, John had no idea what a homosexual was, but he
It
knew
branded him.
he knew what this boy had done to him, and that really sealed the non-sexual, non-physical part of John. And the different things that my husband and I'd gone through with him before and during, I realized I couldn't trust him with my kids. I really didn't feel like he was safe. That he had some really unfortunate characteristics that I didn't trust him to be able to be a good dad. And I also lost a lot of love for him. So I basically divorced him. But my son thought that his dad was leaving because he was ruined.
Mm. This story is just devastating, frankly, because you chronicle a whole series of emotional events that happened, which probably a lot of them we can all relate to.
Oh yeah.
And then you have this extremely bright individual performing way above his age group and also being forced into social situations way above his age group.
Mm-hmm.
And he takes his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't imagine how difficult it has been to go back and unravel this. And yet, for your sanity, you almost have to unravel the story, don't you?
I had to know. I had to learn his story.
Yeah.
I knew my story. My story couldn't have possibly ended like that. My story of him couldn't have ended like that. So that meant I missed him. I missed his life story. And as the mother of a genius who could have been out doing the most amazing things right now in the world and doing guaranteed, 100% guaranteed, I couldn't live with myself without knowing every single thing I missed. I just had to find out what was his story, not my story, his story. And so that's what I used all my training to do, is what would it have been like from his point of view? What happened here? What happened here? What happened here? What happened here? And I could see now I could see exactly what made sense of what he would have his last words were, which would have been, and then I killed myself. That would have been how he ended his life. And so I had to find out all the stories that fit that bottom line. And so that's what I did. And it was excruciating.
I don't think any parent ever knows their child, do they?
I don't think so. And I don't know how much of my own story is true. I'm sure it's a lot truer than the one I had. I'm sure I've missed some pieces, but it's as good as I could possibly do. And then I had to find a way to make it useful, to help others avoid what happened to John. And that's when the Erik Erikson's 8 Ages of Man came into my brain, because that was the one thing out of all of the different things I learned in psychology. That was the one thing I was like, why didn't I know about this before? Why didn't I know about this? Would have helped me so much. This would have been, and it was such an easy, simple thing. But if you don't know it, you can't apply it. You can't use it. And this would have made a huge difference in all that I had been meant to do, tried to do, and everything. Of course, his brother never went through any of that. His brother's story is a completely different one, but it's also fascinating.
Give everyone a quick overview of Erikson's work so they know what you're talking about.
Okay. Erik Erikson was a psychosocial, he's called the father of psychosocial therapy. And that means that he talks about the interaction of the inner psychology of a person as they grow in society. So it's what we learn about ourselves is an interaction between the environment and the inner mind's thinking of what is going on. And so you grow, with both things happening simultaneously. And at each age, Dr. Erikson did an analysis, and a really great analysis of every age and what the core growth issue is at each age. And at each age, there's a new core growth issue. And if you know what it is, he also defined what the danger was. It's like a toggle. There's the core issue, and then the antithesis, the danger, if it's not met. And so if you know what the core issue is, like at birth, the core issue is trust versus mistrust. Guess what John learned?
He learned mistrust, obviously.
Yes. So that's why his body would recoil when you came near him or you tried to touch him. That's why he had all and then of course the molestation capitalized on that. And so he went into his head. He didn't trust his body. He didn't trust other people, but he really loved learning. And he was really, really good at it.
How did this fuel your own development?
Well, like I said, it caused a divorce. And I was very poor and with 2 children and a house and trying to raise them and all that. But he was the one who catalyzed me into going back to school and then becoming, a professional. And I think that everything happened in a way for me to be able to write this book. Everything. And this is an interesting piece, Pat. About a month after he died, I was devastated. I was immobilized. And I got a cold call one Sunday afternoon. And it was a woman. And she said, "You don't know me, but I know about your son." And she said, "I'm a psychic. I live in Sedona, Arizona. And I have something incredibly important to tell you about your son. But I won't tell you over the phone. You'll have to come to Sedona. I'll give you a free reading, but I'll have to come. I'm not doing this over the phone." And so at that point, I would have done anything. And my boyfriend at the time drove me down. And she took me into her house, and she had this living room with giant stones, crystal stones of different colors at north, south, east, and west. And we sat in the middle, and her son served us tea. And she started talking. And she talked for about an hour. And she said, what I remember of it that I'll never forget is she said, your son came and did what he needed to do and left. But she said, you and he share the same purpose for being on earth. He's finished his part. You'll finish the rest. And I had no idea what she was talking about. But I do now. And I really feel that he was a sacrifice for the greater good. That doesn't make it okay. It'll never be okay. I'll never get over this. But he's been a teacher. He's used his life as a teaching. And I get that. And his, more than anyone I know, he was very single-minded about it. He really, when he was 16, he was invited into Carnegie Mellon in theoretical math, along with by invitation only, 32 other brilliant kids. And 4 years later, he was the only survivor of that program.
Wow.
To graduate.
I want to pull an excerpt from your book.
Sure.
You wrote, Erickson's chart also gave me the tools to be a wiser shepherd of my own life.
Mm-hmm.
I could reflect back through the earlier stages and finally recognize debilitating messages I fell prey to as a child, internalizing those messages and later reflexively passing them on to my sons.
Yep.
Armed with its knowledge, I could stop repeating past errors, admit them in full, and seek to repair the damage done.
Mm-hmm.
And you go on to write that everything we survive, we can heal.
Yes. Everything we can. Knowledge is power. If we don't reflect, you're going blind into a snowstorm forever. You'll learn nothing, you'll have nothing, it'll be nothing. But if you reflect on what happened and you take it seriously and look at what the lessons are that you can live, then you grow. And nothing, even my son's death, is bad in and of itself. It's what we do about it that makes it either bad or good. I would never wish my son to suicide. I would never have said that's okay. It's not okay. But it's not what happened. It's what we do about it that makes all the difference. And that's what grows us from the inside out. That's what forces us into the hero's journey. Because all heroes have to be wounded to be a hero. You have to be wounded or there's no hero. There has to be something that happened that sets you on this path. And this is what my son, he was a hero. He certainly lived the hero's journey 100,000%. And he was a success beyond successes. He was the only one to graduate. He was 21. He had his bachelor's and master's in theoretical math.
I think everybody's life is the hero's journey. And I think you are so right that the key to making it a hero's journey as opposed to just giving up is that ability to internally reflect, live from the inside out as opposed from the outside in.
Exactly. But, a lot of people take something like that and it's just demolishing, and it does demolish you. But it's just like when you are left with so many unknowns, you're at a new beginning. And what do you want to make out of that? Because nothing's ever gone. It's really here for us to work with, to fight with, to question, to ask, to learn and grow. And that grows your neural capacity. And especially using your passion and your feelings to emotionally feel everything and do what it takes, because it takes tremendous energy to overcome the kinds of things that people are going through. And the only way to do it is with passion, to care, to know that, there's something I'm going to learn here and something I'm going to grow from. And this is going to make that bad thing a little bit better because I do.
For my paying subscribers, the best is yet to come. Join in part 2 of this powerful conversation with Sally Raymond.